The disappearance of Neanderthals. The expansion of the mammalian order since the dino-squashing asteroid has been a resounding success, but the last 100,000 years or so have been followed by a disturbing trend. Mammal life bloomed all over the world, until, one by one, continents experienced a sharp decline in diversity. These declines appear to have all occurred within about 10,000 years of the arrival of modern humans. Coincidence? Let's find out. We all know of the tragic loss of charismatic megafauna like mammoths and giant ground sloths, but some of the lesser-known casualties of this ongoing rampage were our closest relatives. No, not the chimps. Even closer than that. There were once at least 5 other species of humans sharing the planet with our ancestors. And until surprisingly recently, we were sharing caves and perhaps beds like rhino hide with another human species. This is the story of The Last of Us. From no Homo to 9 Homo, and then back to just 1. Well, 1 and a bit. Let's start at the beginning. The genus, Homo, our genus, is one of several in the family of hominids called Hominidae. Today, we share the family with 4 genera of the great apes, and we are now the only species in our genus. But it wasn't always like this. First, there were none. Earliest human-like predecessors include Australopithecus, a genus with several species that originated around 4 million years ago. Then, around 2.8 million years, the first Homo species showed up, Homo habilis. The migration of our human ancestors out of Africa are still a matter of debate, and the details change with the seasons as new hypotheses are tested and new information comes out. What's certain is that our ancestors evolved in Africa. Exactly when, and more specifically, when modern humans chose to leave, is one of those great uncertainties. Dates have shifted in recent decades from 50,000 years ago to 80,000 years ago, and now more up to 100,000 or even 210,000 years ago. Hold on to that last figure, because we'll come back to it again later. The first Homo species to leave Africa was probably every middle schooler's favorite, Homo erectus. But they weren't the first of our family to do so. Members of Hominidae were migrating into Europe as far back as 17 million years ago. Now, Homo erectus deserve their own entire video, but we can at least give them a quick shout out here. This was a species of humans that not only invented cooking, standing up straight, and having big brains, but they did it a million years ago or so before any other species, and explored the globe uncontested for almost 9 times as long as we've been doing it. By 600,000 years ago, Africa contained a possible descendant of Homo erectus called Homo heidelbergensis. And around 500,000 years ago, so did Europe. It wasn't long after this that our species, Homo sapiens, shows up in the fossil record, originating in Africa. Somewhere between 700,000 and 500,000 years ago, we became the 9th species of human to give this world domination thing a shot. 2 were already extinct, and 2 had yet to be invented, but early Homo sapiens shared the globe with Homos nidali, Antecessor, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, and Neanderthalensis. The divergence estimates that all of these species are still all over the place, but it's commonly accepted that Heidelbergensis and Sapien split within Africa, and then sometime later, Neanderthals split from the European population of Heidelbergensis. Still, genetic evidence also suggests that Neanderthals, like Sapiens, may have split within Africa and then migrated. Regardless, the Neanderthals were the first truly European human species, and they arrived on the scene at least 200,000 years ago, possibly as early as 400,000 years ago. But whenever it was, Neanderthals began their dominance of Europe during the period of on-again, off-again, will-they, won't-they ice ages, and this led to a process known as Neanderthalization, in which the species quickly evolved adaptations designed to tolerate the incredible drops in temperature. It's likely they migrated north during the interglacial periods and were chased back south again during peak ice formation. Each time there would be incredible casualties as local populations would go extinct and survivors would migrate south to warmer climates of southern Europe and start repopulating. What were Neanderthals like? The first archaeological evidence of Neanderthals was discovered in Belgium in 1829, but nobody knew it at the time. It was later, in Germany in the 1850s, that anybody knows these bones were something other than those of modern humans. It was around this time that the idea of the natural world as anything more than a collection of divine hand-me-downs for Western, God-fearing colonizers to exploit was still in its radical infancy. Pretty much anything that wasn't an upper-class European gent was considered lower, including various groups of people who just looked a bit different. So it's no wonder that our first impressions of Neanderthals were of club-wielding idiots that lived in caves and probably flung feces. And despite forming a more realistic image of these incredible humans just decades later, the image of the dumb, ape-like caveman permeated the social consciousness until very recently, and to some degree still does. But the Neanderthals were far more impressive than we would like to admit. Neanderthals were tough as nails and adapted well to the almost inhospitable conditions of the Eurasian continent. They were stronger than us, faster than us, and, as much as Hollywood would try to deny it, they had bigger brains. Unlike modern humans, whose skulls bulge out of the back to accommodate bigger brains, Neanderthal skulls extended backwards and gave them a sloped head. But this gave the Neanderthal a higher average brain size than we have, and this is despite having a shorter stature too. It's thought that Neanderthals would have a better vision, with larger eyes and bigger orbits. This would have aided them as they migrated away from the equator into lands with long winter nights. Conversely, modern humans appear to have a larger cerebella and olfactory regions of the brain too. This too will prove to be important later. Neanderthals became the first human species to permanently occupy Eurasia, and while they were there, it seemed like nobody else could get a foot in the door. Their range spanned from Western Europe across into Southwest and Central Asia, and up into the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia. And thar be monsters! At this time, Eurasia was absolutely littered with terrifying animals. Mammoths, giant deer, bison, woolly rhinos, and various other scary herbivores roamed the plains, but perhaps worse were the giant hyenas, lions, leopards, saber-toothed tigers, and cave wolves to contend with. And Neanderthals faced them all with only big brains and stone tools. But while they may have been truly ferocious individuals to become apex predators in these terrifying realms, they were also thoughtful and creative. Ornaments and cave paintings suggest that they had a concept of art, and blankets and ponchos were woven out of local materials to use against the cold. And, of course, they were social. Many Neanderthal remains show signs of traumatic injuries from any number of aforementioned threats, yet they would be taken care of long enough before these injuries show signs of healing. Albeit in smaller groups, Neanderthals thrived in these hostile places. They were so good at what they did, even that they appear to have been able to keep modern humans out of Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, earlier we asked you to hold on to a figure. That estimate of arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe dates back as far as 210,000 years ago, and here's why it's relevant. Homo sapiens appear to have gotten a foothold on the European continent around 60,000 to 40,000 years ago. But this wasn't their first try. It appears that there may have been several disparate attempts, with at least two known, at 180,000 and 210,000 years ago, which were cut short possibly by the resident humans. Yet, sapiens found little resistance from other species they encountered, spreading out of Africa and eastwards into Asia successfully as early as 100,000 years ago. Perhaps Neanderthals were the reason it took our lineage so long to get established in Europe. These cave-dwelling, club-swinging idiots outcompeted us for hundreds of thousands of years. Until, one day, they didn't. Around 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens finally gained traction in Europe, and very soon afterwards, Neanderthals disappeared without a trace. Having blasted through the other species of human outside of Africa, Homo sapiens turned their attention to Europe one final time. After hundreds of thousands of years of brutal glacial cycles, the Neanderthal gene pool was weakened and their tribes were small. By the time sapiens took over, there were likely very few left already, but no one knows exactly how or why it went down. There are several hypotheses, and the truth will likely be a combination of at least some of them. So, what are these extinction theories? The first one comes down to differences in technical, economic, and social systems. By the time Homo sapiens came around again for its final shot at the champ, our ancestors had evolved a lot, physically, but also culturally and technologically. Larger social groups and more complex social systems, including economics of trade, could have given sapiens the upper hand. However, there is no direct evidence of complex trade at this point, so this hypothesis needs more work. Another possible explanation for the disappearance of Neanderthals was their specialized hunting habits. The Neanderthal diet could have played a significant role, and there is strong evidence for differences in subsistence strategies to back up this idea. Isotope analysis from preserved collagen in Neanderthal samples have shown that Neanderthals were highly carnivorous and top predators in their ecosystems, with very little variance in diet across time and space. This diet seemed to be more or less the same across every region in Europe, and across the span of almost 100,000 years. They appear to be excellent hunters of woolly rhinoceros and woolly mammoths, and not so keen on scavenging or hunting smaller game. Perhaps Neanderthals had hundreds of thousands of years of tradition of hunting these enormous beasts, and had become too specialized. In comparison, the same tests on early Homo sapien samples show a much wider range of diets, especially when it comes to freshwater and marine food sources. It's not known whether the stricter Neanderthal subsistence behavior was so inflexible that they were less fit for survival, but we do see something similar in orcas, one of our most intelligent mammal species, and also specialist hunters. Orcas have very strict menus that vary from population to population, but they never deviate from their traditional prey. Fish-eating orcas won't hunt whales, and vice versa. Another possible explanation? Temperature flux. The extinction of Neanderthals coincides with a period of extreme temperature fluctuations at the end of the Ice Age. The extinction itself also appears to be non-linear and really quite a long, drawn-out process that wasn't evenly spread across the continent. By now, we know Neanderthals exhibited behaviors we could reasonably consider modern, so some argue that it wasn't a case of a more advanced species taking over, but a product of the chaotic climate at the time. And another hypothesis? Brain differences. Despite having bigger brains, the distribution of that brain power was likely different from that of modern humans, too, and this could have prevented Neanderthals from adapting as quickly. The enormous brains of Neanderthals were perhaps not as complex as our own. Regions responsible for speech and social complexity could have given way to more basic traits such as night vision and precision hearing. These traits make for a phenomenal predator, but perhaps at the expense of diplomacy and intricate teamwork. Okay, when analyzing the extinction of Neanderthals, we can't neglect to talk about their cannibalism. It's important not to judge them for this next one, at least until we ourselves have experienced 400,000 years of local extinctions and dramatic climate shifts. But it appears that cannibalism was an evolutionary trait selected for during the Neanderthal presence in Europe, as a response to periods of loss. Essentially, it's the species-level equivalent of cooking up your fattest friend's leg to eat after a plane crash in the Alps while you wait 3 months for a rescue team to arrive. Only, this would have been on the scale of hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Cannibalism may have worked when there was plenty of friends left to eat, but could have finally put the nail in the coffin of the dwindling Neanderthal populations towards the end. And this time, they weren't just waiting for the cold to end. They were competing with a rival species of human that didn't appear to have adopted the practice of eating each other. But even cannibals can be sexy. Our ancestors certainly thought so anyway, because the last hypothesis involves such prolific copulation that it may have wiped out the entire species. The assimilation hypothesis is perhaps only one in a sea of suggested reasons for Neanderthal extinction, but it is also one with the most glaring evidence. We really have been caught red-handed here, at least those of us with Asian and European genes. Pretty much everyone outside of Africa, and a small number of those in Africa too, have a fraction of their DNA, up to 4%, that belongs to Neanderthals. Whether this was combined consentingly between our prehistoric grandparents, or as a product of violence and pillage, is probably never going to be known though, considering our history of the latter. We can take a guess. However, it went down. It most definitely went down. And it's possible that interbreeding between two of our very closely related species is what gradually dissolved the Neanderthal line until there were none left. So, with the rapidly declining gene pool of late-stage Neanderthals, it looks as though they were driven to one of the most humiliating and desperate acts of the Pleistocene epoch, sleeping with us. But as their pure Neanderthal blood was diluted amongst our own, that meant their lineage was also partially secured, to endure their own extinction for as long as our species survives, as a part of us. That's all for today, folks. For more prehistoric nerd content, check out our other videos and subscribe. And as always, stay curious, fossil files.